The fluorescent lights hummed overhead, casting a sterile glow across the polished mahogany desk, separating me from Richard Blackwell. My supervisor's face remained impassive as he slid the stack of financial reports toward me, his manicured fingernails tapping impatiently on the cover page. "Just sign these adjusted reports," he demanded, his voice unnervingly calm despite what he was asking me to do. I glanced down at the documents, my eyes catching the fabricated numbers immediately. 15 years as a senior accountant had taught me to spot discrepancies within seconds. The quarterly earnings had been inflated by nearly 30%. The debt-to-asset ratio had been artificially lowered. Client funds had been reallocated under different categories. "I can't falsify financial records," I replied, my voice steady despite the quickening of my pulse. Richard's expression hardened. The corner of his mouth twitched, a tell I'd noticed whenever his carefully maintained facade began to crack. "Clean out your desk by 5 p.m., he snapped, standing abruptly. "How you're finished here, Hayes." I simply nodded and left without argument. No raised voice, no desperate pleas, just the soft click of the door behind me. Back at my desk, I felt the eyes of my colleagues watching me through the glass partition walls. They knew something had happened, but none approached. The rhythmic ticking of the wall clock punctuated the silence as I methodically emptied my drawers. 15 years condensed into a single cardboard box. I placed my company keycard atop my empty desk and walked out through the lobby, passing the framed mission statement I'd helped draft years ago. Integrity in every transaction. The irony wasn't lost on me. In my car, I didn't immediately start the engine. Instead, I reached into my jacket pocket and removed the USB drive containing duplicates of the original, unaltered financial reports from the past 4 quarters. I hadn't gathered them out of paranoia. I'd simply followed proper backup protocols. Protocols that would now serve a different purpose. A strange sense of clarity washed over me. My career at Blackwell Financial was over, but something else was just beginning. I wasn't devastated, I wasn't even angry. I was resolute. The morning sun painted golden streaks across the orientation room when I first met Richard Blackwell. He was a rising star at the firm, already a senior manager at 34, renowned for turning struggling departments into profit centers. I was a recent MBA graduate with a passion for corporate accounting and a naive belief that the financial sector could operate with uncompromising ethics. "We're not just looking for number crunchers," Richard had told our orientation group, his charisma palpable. "We need people who understand that financial integrity is the backbone of this institution." I believed him then. We all did. My first years at Blackwell Financial exceeded all expectations. I advanced quickly from junior accountant to team lead, then to department manager. Richard became my direct supervisor when I was promoted to senior financial controller. We worked well together initially, his visionary ideas balanced by my meticulous execution. "You're the conscience of this department, Daniel," he once told me during my performance review. "I push boundaries, you keep us honest." That balance began to shift 3 years ago after the merger with Eastern Capital. The pressure from shareholders intensified. Quarterly targets became increasingly aggressive. Richard's demeanor changed. Subtly, longer hours, cancelled lunches, closed-door meetings with executives I'd never seen before. Small inconsistencies appeared in our reporting procedures. Capital expenditures reclassified as operational costs, accelerated revenue recognition, extended depreciation schedules. Each change technically defensible in isolation, but forming a pattern that made me increasingly uncomfortable. "It's just accounting flexibility," Richard explained when I questioned him about a particularly creative interpretation of lease obligations. "Every firm does this. We're just optimizing within the guidelines." I voiced my concerns but continued, signing off on the reports. The discrepancies were in gray areas, questionable but not clearly illegal. I told myself I was being overly cautious, that Richard understood regulatory boundaries better than I did. Then came subtle changes in office dynamics. My exclusion from certain meetings, restricted access to raw financial data, new hires reporting directly to Richard rather than through proper departmental channels. Lisa from IT mentioned casually over lunch that Richard had requested comprehensive access to the financial database, including the ability to modify historical entries, a capability no executive had ever been granted. "He said it was approved by the board," she said, picking at her salad. "But I thought you should know." That evening, I began creating secure backups of all unaltered financial records. Not out of suspicion, I told myself, but due diligence. I established a private email account and forwarded key correspondence to it. I documented meeting notes meticulously and kept them in a password-protected file. At home, I established a separate emergency fund, enough to cover 6 months of expenses. I updated my resume and quietly reconnected with former colleagues who had moved to other firms. Preparation, not paranoia. The annual audit approached, and Richard's demands became increasingly problematic. Minor adjustments evolved into material misrepresentations. When I questioned a particularly egregious reclassification of a failed investment, his response chilled me. "The audit committee sees what we show them, Daniel. That's how this works." I maintained my external composure while internally documenting every concerning instruction. I began researching whistleblower protections and corporate governance regulations. I consulted anonymously with an attorney specializing in financial ethics. The relationship deteriorated further when the quarterly reports came due. My team prepared them according to standard accounting principles, only to have Richard return them with executive adjustments. Each version pushed further beyond acceptable accounting practices. I realized then that I was facing an inevitable confrontation, one that would likely end my career at Blackwell Financial. Yet somehow this clarity brought an unexpected calm. I wasn't afraid anymore. I was prepared. The weight of the cardboard box seemed insignificant compared to the decision ahead of me. Standing in my apartment, surrounded by the remnants of my professional life, I methodically unpacked my belongings, a collection of industry awards, family photos, the fountain pen my father had given me when I graduated, the lingering scent of office disinfectant clung to everything, a chemical reminder of the sterile environment I'd left behind. Rain tapped gently against the windows as evening descended, creating a soothing counterpoint to my racing thoughts. I placed the USB drive on my desk and stared at it. Within its circuitry lay enough evidence to potentially bring down Blackwell, Financial's entire executive team, but whistleblowing carried its own risks. Retaliation, blacklisting, years of potential litigation. I needed advice from someone I could trust implicitly. "You did the right thing refusing to sign," said Marcus when I called him that evening. My former professor from business school had become both mentor and friend over the years. "But you need to be strategic about what comes next." "I'm not looking to burn the place down," I said, tracing invisible patterns on the condensation of my water glass. "But they're defrauding investors, possibly breaking federal regulations." "Then document everything meticulously," he advised. "Not just what happened today, but every questionable request, every concerning conversation over the past few years. Times, dates, witnesses. Create a chronology they can't dispute." I spent the entire weekend building exactly that. I created a secure cloud account under a pseudonym and uploaded duplicate copies of all evidence. I printed key documents and stored them in a safety deposit box at a bank across town. I reconstructed email exchanges from memory when written records weren't available. On Monday morning, while my former colleagues were logging into their workstations, I sat across from Ellen Winters, an attorney specializing in corporate whistleblower cases. "The Securities and Exchange Commission takes these matters seriously," she explained, reviewing my documentation. "But the process can be lengthy. Are you prepared for that?" "How lengthy?" I asked. "Months, possibly years," she replied, her expression somber. "And during that time, finding new employment in your field might be challenging." I'd anticipated this. "I've made financial arrangements," I said simply. Ellen nodded approvingly. "Most people don't. They act on impulse, then panic when reality sets in." She explained the whistleblower protection provisions under the Dodd-Frank Act and outlined our next steps. We would file a confidential report with the SEC, providing sufficient evidence to trigger an investigation without immediately revealing my identity. "What about the company's internal audit committee?" I asked. "They're scheduled to review quarterly results next week." Ellen tapped her pen thoughtfully against her notepad. "Normally, I'd advise against internal reporting first, but if they're independent auditors, rather than company employees, and they're already scheduled," she made a note, "we could ensure the SEC investigation coincides with their audit. 2 parallel investigations might uncover more than either would separately." We spent hours preparing a detailed brief for the SEC. As we worked, Ellen asked an unexpected question. "What made you refuse to sign? You must have known the consequences." I paused, considering. "It wasn't a decision, really. It was a boundary I couldn't cross. That evening I made 2 calls. The first to Andrew Chen, head of the Independent Audit Committee, requesting a confidential meeting ahead of next week's scheduled audit. The second to Lisa in IT, who had always maintained professional integrity despite pressure. "The system automatically backs up all database modifications, doesn't it?" I asked after exchanging pleasantries. "Every change creates a log entry." "Yes," she confirmed cautiously. "Why?" "Those logs might be important soon," I said. "Can they be altered?" "Not without leaving traces," she replied, her voice dropping to just above a whisper. "Daniel, what's happening?" "Just make sure those logs remain intact," I advised. "And maybe take a personal day next Tuesday." As I ended the call, a notification appeared on my phone. An email from Blackwell Financial's HR department, officially terminating my employment for insubordination and failure to perform assigned duties. They'd voided my non-compete clause, but included a reminder about my confidentiality agreement. They thought they were tying up loose ends. They didn't realize they were removing the only remaining restraint on my actions. I wasn't seeking vengeance. I was securing justice. Tuesday morning arrived with a clarity I hadn't experienced in years. The knowledge that today would irrevocably change many lives, including my own, brought with it a strange serenity. I dressed meticulously. Charcoal suit, crisp white shirt, the blue tie I'd worn to my father's funeral, not for appearance, but for purpose. Today needed to feel consequential. The coffee shop across from Blackwell Financial's headquarters offered a perfect vantage point. Through rain-streaked windows, I watched the audit team arrive in a procession of black SUVs. Andrew Chen led the group, his expression grave as they passed through the revolving doors. My phone vibrated with a message from Ellen. "SEC investigators en route. Stay available but distant." Inside the building, as confirmed later by multiple colleagues, the day unfolded exactly as planned. Lisa from IT escorted the auditors to the server room first, not the conference room where Richard had prepared his presentation materials. By noon, they had full access to the unfiltered database logs, showing every modification Richard had made to the financial records, each time stamped and authenticated. Mr. Blackwell seemed confused when we didn't show up for his opening presentation. Andrew told me later. By the time he found us, we were already comparing the altered statements against the original data entries. Richard's attempts to control the narrative apparently disintegrated quickly. When confronted with the unmistakable pattern of deliberate falsification, he tried to implicate others, including me. Hayes was responsible for final verification, he reportedly insisted. If there were irregularities, he should have caught them. But the electronic trail showed otherwise. My documented objections to specific entries, Richard's subsequent modifications made after hours, the sudden termination following my refusal to sign, all formed an unambiguous chronology. By mid-afternoon, SEC investigators had joined the audit team. Company counsel was called in. The board chairman arrived looking ashen-faced. I learned these details piecemeal through text messages from former colleagues. I didn't respond, simply absorbing the information as I sat quietly in my apartment, organizing financial records for the formal deposition scheduled for the following day. At 4:37 p.m., Ellen called. "They're escorting Richard and the CFO from the building. The SEC is sealing certain offices. The board has called an emergency session." "How bad is it?" I asked. "Worse than we thought," she replied, her voice taut with controlled excitement. This wasn't just about inflating quarterly results. They were systematically misappropriating investment funds, creating phantom returns, and hiding massive losses from failed ventures. We're talking potential wire fraud, securities violations, multiple counts of false statements to investors. The scale of the deception explained Richard's increasing desperation, his insistence that I sign those final reports. They would have completed a complex shell game that had apparently been underway for years. "What happens now?" I asked. "The company will distance itself from Richard and anyone directly implicated. They'll claim ignorance and cooperate fully to minimize corporate liability. There will be regulatory penalties, likely criminal charges against the primary actors, and inevitable shareholder lawsuits. And for me, you're now officially a whistleblower under SEC protection. There may be opportunities for asset recovery compensation, though that's far down the road. More immediately, you should prepare for significant attention. Some wanted, some not." I thanked her and ended the call, turning to the window as evening settled over the city. Lights flickered on in office buildings as people prepared to head home, unaware that several blocks away, careers were ending and a company was beginning its painful reckoning. My phone vibrated again. A message from Marcus. "You did this the right way. No drama, no personal vendetta, just justice through proper channels." That night, as news of the scandal broke across financial media, I sat on my balcony watching distant lightning illuminate storm clouds. The thunder arrived seconds later, a delayed consequence of forces already in motion. I wasn't experiencing satisfaction or vindication, just a quiet certainty that maintaining integrity, even at great personal cost, had been the only viable choice. I wasn't seeking revenge through destruction. I was restoring balance through truth. 8 months passed like a slow exhale. Winter yielded reluctantly to spring, then summer, each season marking another milestone in the aftermath. Richard and 2 other executives faced federal charges. The board chairman resigned in disgrace. Blackwell Financial underwent a painful restructuring, emerging smaller but ostensibly more ethical under new leadership. Former colleagues scattered to other firms or remained to rebuild. I had testified at regulatory hearings and depositions, each time recounting the same unembellished facts. No embellishment was necessary. The raw truth was damning enough. The section. Morning dew still clung to wildflowers as I walked the path circling my new property, 3 acres in the Vermont countryside, with a modest farmhouse I was gradually renovating. The investment had been made possible partly by the SEC Whistleblower Award, though I donated half to a foundation supporting ethical business education. The porch steps creaked beneath my weight as I settled into the handcrafted Adirondack chair, steam rising from my coffee mug into the crisp morning air. Maple, my golden retriever rescue, sprawled contentedly at my feet. My phone rarely rang these days, a welcome change. When it did, the calls were increasingly about consulting, opportunities rather than legal proceedings, companies wanting ethics compliance programs, business schools requesting guest lectures, a publisher interested in a book on corporate integrity. "You've become something of a case study," Marcus had told me during his visit last month. The accountant who brought down a financial giant by simply refusing to compromise. The characterization made me uncomfortable. I hadn't sought to be a cautionary tale or inspirational figure. I'd simply maintained a boundary that couldn't be crossed, regardless of consequences. The sound of tires on gravel announced my first visitor of the day. Andrea Miller stepped from her car, clutching a leather portfolio. Once a junior analyst on my team, she'd survived the company's implosion and found her footing in the restructured organization. "The view here is everything you described," she said, accepting the mug of coffee I offered as we settled on the porch. Maple immediately claimed a spot beside our visitor, head resting on her shoe. "How are things at the office?" I asked. "Different. Better, I think. There's a new transparency policy. All financial reports are reviewed by multiple departments before submission. Any audit concerns are reported directly to the board." She paused. "They've even created an ethics ombudsman position." I nodded, watching a hawk circle lazily above the meadow. "And you? How are you doing?" "I almost left after everything happened," she admitted. "But it felt like running away. So I stayed, pushed for changes from within." She hesitated. "That's actually why I'm here." She opened her portfolio and removed several documents, an employment offer for a senior advisory position with the newly formed Ethics Compliance Division. The compensation was fair, the responsibilities substantial. "The new CEO wants someone with unimpeachable integrity to help rebuild trust," she explained. "Your name was the only one suggested." I glanced through the offer without responding immediately. The company car, corner office, and executive benefits held no appeal, but the opportunity to transform an organization from within, to ensure what happened under Richard could never happen again, that carried weight. "I don't need to return to corporate life," I said finally, "but I'll consider a part-time advisory role. No title, no benefits package, just the authority to implement. Genuine safeguards and the independence to maintain them." Andrea smiled. "I told them you'd say something like that." After she left, promising to return with a revised proposal, I remained on the porch, watching shadows shift across the rolling landscape as morning matured. Toward noon, my phone chimed with a message from Ellen. Sentencing hearing scheduled for Richard. 10 years recommended. Restitution to investors being finalized. I set the phone aside without replying. The legal consequences had never been my focus, merely the natural outcome of exposing truth. That evening, as sunset painted the western sky in impossible hues, I finished installing bookshelves in what would become a home office, one facing the mountains rather than city skyscrapers. Maple watched from her bed in the corner, tail thumping gently against the hardwood floor. The box containing my remaining mementos from Blackwell Financial sat unopened on the desk. After a moment's consideration, I moved it to a closet instead. Those artifacts belonged to a closed chapter. This quiet place, with its honest work and clear purpose, felt more authentic than the corner office I'd once occupied. The silence wasn't empty, it was clarifying. The solitude wasn't isolation, it was recalibration. I wasn't the only one Richard had tried to compromise, but I was the one who refused to bend,